Burnout isn't asking you to rest. If rest didn't fix it, that's because burnout never needed your sleep. It's not a signal of weakness, it's actually a signal of misalignment. It's the kind that anyone performing at a high level rarely gets to see until it hits them right smack in the forehead. Here's the twist: most of us respond by trying harder, right? It's a reflex. Something isn't working, so of course, you're going to want to double down. You tweak your habits, you pull longer hours, you meditate more, you schedule like another weekend reset. Just amp it all up, right? It feels productive until it's not. And then you've got nothing left to give. So, today we're decoding what burnout is actually trying to tell you, and then how to interpret it before making any hasty moves. Burnout doesn't announce itself politely, it doesn't send a memo. It actually shows up as a set of like recurring thoughts you can't quite shake off. And once you notice them, you realize they're actually weirdly specific. For example, I'm responsible for the outcome, but I'm also not allowed to decide anything. You're accountable when things go wrong. But then when it comes time to actually choose direction, you're looped in after the decision's already been made. So you end up managing consequences instead of actually shaping outcomes. And that tension you feel, that's not confusion, that's actually constraint. Or maybe burnout sounds more like this: why do I keep thinking so hard if no one's actually listening? You're asked for input, you offer nuance, and people nod. Someone says, hey, great point. Then the meeting barrels forward exactly as planned. And after a while, you like stop sharpening your ideas, not because you can't, but because you've actually learned that they don't travel very far. Sometimes it's quieter. Did any of that even land? You finish something important, right? You hand it off, and it disappears into the organizational ether. No feedback, no sense of impact. And then there's this one: if I don't hold this together, it falls apart. You're the fixer, you're the stabilizer, the person who like patches things up just enough to keep things moving. And somehow, like that becomes your job description. You're valued for endurance, not for changing what keeps breaking. So the chaos ends up staying, and you get tired. Now, if any of these feel like uncomfortably familiar, here's the thing to notice: burnout isn't confusion, it's clarity you've been ignoring. It's not vague, it's not random, it's narrating in real time where you're being stretched in ways that don't make sense. And none of these voices are saying, I'm lazy, I'm weak, I can't handle this. They're all saying some version of this. This setup isn't actually letting me do my best work, and I'm having to pay for it. Here's the irony: the people most likely to misread burnout are the same people who are always very, very good at fixing things. So if something feels off, your instinct isn't to complain, right? It's to adjust. You make the assumption that, like, there's gotta be a smarter way to do this. Or maybe I just haven't hacked the system yet. You know what? I just need to refine my approach. So you do what you've always done. You optimize, you tighten your workflow, you become exceptionally good at managing around the problem. And for a while, it works, which is exactly why the system gets harder to hear. Because burnout doesn't show up as failure, it shows up as friction. You're still performing, you're still delivering, and you're still getting positive feedback, at least on paper, but everything feels like heavier than it should. So here's the part that most people miss: burnout isn't immediate feedback, it's delayed feedback, which is why it's so easy to misread. In most systems, the feedback is fast, right? You make a bad decision, it fails. You miss a deadline and someone notices. Burnout doesn't work like that. It shows up late, right? It shows up after competence, after the praise, after you've always proven that you can handle things. That's the paradox. People who burn out are not the ones who are struggling. They're the ones who are absorbing friction so well that the system never feels it. So you compensate, you smooth things over, you make judgment calls quietly and discreetly, you patch gaps without escalating them. And because things keep moving, the environment actually learns, hey, this is fine. This works. What it's actually learning is you will carry the cost. Burnout is the moment when that cost finally surfaces, not as like a dramatic collapse, but as like a dull, persistent sense that something is off. Nothing is wrong on paper. Targets are hit, expectations are met, and yet everything feels heavier than it should. That is delayed feedback. The system didn't signal the problem early because your competence muted the alarm. So the signal reroutes, it shows up in your body, your patience, your motivation, your tolerance for things you used to shrug off. Burnout is what happens when misalignment goes uncorrected for too long because someone capable kept compensating for it. And this is why high performers struggle to trust that signal. They're used to feedback, right? The feedback being tied to mistakes. So when burnout appears without like an obvious error, they assume it must be personal. It's like, I must be tired, right? Or I must need a reset. Or I must be doing something wrong. But burnout isn't actually accusing you of failure. It's reporting accumulated strain, the strain that never registered earlier because you were too effective. So think of it this way, like burnout isn't the problem. It's the receipt. It's the receipt for decisions you didn't get to shape, for the effort that maintained stability instead of creating leverage for you. And because the feedback arrived late, it feels really confusing. It's out of proportion, it's hard to trace, but it's not random. It's precise, just delayed. And once you see burnout this way, you stop asking yourself, like, how do I push through this, right? And you start asking instead, what has the system been quietly relying on me to absorb? That is the shift. It's not action yet, it's not optimization, there's just more clarity. Delayed feedback is still feedback. And once you know how to read it, you're not actually guessing anymore what burnout means. So this is usually like the moment people actually start panicking because once burnout starts to make sense, the first thought is like, okay, do I quit? Do I switch teams? Do I just start over? I get it. Action feels clean. It's decisive. It's like relief. But here's the thing. Clarity comes before movement. Burnout is not a fire alarm. It's a diagnostic readout. So treat it like an emergency exit, and you don't fix the problem. You just change scenery, right? And I've seen this pattern happen again and again. Someone leaves a role that feels suffocating. The new job feels really light at first. Different faces, fresh calendar, new language, right? And then suddenly the same tensions start to show up. Not because they picked wrong, but because they moved before understanding what the signal was pointing to. Here's the counterintuitive part. Burnout is most useful when you don't rush to resolve it. Observe, don't optimize. Where are you overfunctioning just to keep things afloat? And where does effort actually land? And where does it disappear? Which parts of your work drain you? Not because they're hard, but because they don't make sense. That's not rumination. That's data collection, right? Think of it this way. Burnout isn't the storm. It's like the terrain speaking. You move without reading it and you don't escape the landscape. You just end up like tired somewhere else. And once you've seen the terrain clearly, that's when real power actually begins. Understanding comes before action. That's where insight lives. And burnout isn't like asking you to vanish, it's pointing to where your effort is hitting walls. Notice where your strengths stop translating into influence. Notice where your competence is quietly carrying costs no one else sees. Once you can name that, you're no longer running blind. You're actually aware, you're equipped, and suddenly what used to feel like chaos starts to make sense because burnout isn't confusion, it's clarity, delayed, but finally audible.